This time, the beginning of our story is not the start of everything. On Court Island, on the fourth floor of the dungeon, there stood the 16th ranked player in the unified ranking, Pixword, accompanied by 8 ranked players following him and 200 elite members of the Silver Knight Guild. He stated that with such a force, they could capture a small fortress, but he couldn't calm down. On the fourth floor of the dungeon on Cork Island, the boys showed up after 2 weeks of Argal. They had endured great struggles trying to defeat him over the past 5 weeks, spending significant time and money to enhance their items and pairings in the meantime. With 3 minutes remaining, Pixword believed the boys were undoubtedly stronger after all their investments. But then, they noticed someone unusual, a lone figure at the start of the dungeon, wearing nothing but a cloak. Pixword wondered, who is that weakling? The figure glanced at them all. Pixword, puzzled, exclaimed, "What the hell is this?" Noticing that the man had no equipment, only a cape, he began to question how the man had bypassed their defensive troops. Is he an elite-trained assassin? He speculated, but quickly dismissed the thought. An assassin wouldn't reveal himself like that. Seeing the man's name, Pixword identified him as Grid and searched for his profile but couldn't find a ranked player with that name. Looking at his subordinates, none of them understood what was happening. "It seems the guards must be asleep," Pixword remarked disdainfully. He declared that the area was under the control of the Silver Overnight Guild and questioned how the man had gotten there. But since they were about to commence an important battle, Pixword warned Grid to leave if he didn't want to die. Grid responded, pondering why his invisibility had disappeared. Did our gal detect me? He wondered. Deciding he no longer needed the cape, he removed it. Everyone was stunned by the armor Grid was wearing. An elaborate golden suit with red accents and a tail. "What kind of armor is this?" they questioned. Hank snapped them out of their daze, demanding they take care of that clown. But then, a fiery explosion erupted as our gal made his dramatic appearance. The monster unleashed our gal's roar, inflicting fear, confusion, and debilitating effects while reducing fire resistance by 50%. To top it off, our gal unleashed a fire pillar attack, wiping out most of the guild members. Pixword realized that half of the guild had been obliterated by a single attack. Despite having increased his own fire resistance by 86%, he still took significant damage. He began to question whether they had failed once more. Amid the chaos, Grid calmly walked through the flames, leaving Pixword bewildered. How is he untouched by this fire that's strong enough to annihilate half the guild? Pixword asked himself. Grid then summoned a pickaxe and began mining in the midst of the battle. Pixword was dumbfounded. Is this a joke? He's mining or with our gal right there. Meanwhile, Grid complained about the heat and the increasing difficulty of his tasks. He muttered about needing to visit the dragon's lair with his pickaxe next. Our gal launched another attack, which Grid withstood effortlessly. "Can't you do something about this monster?" Grid asked Pixword, complaining about the worsening heat. Pixword was speechless. "How are you not injured?" he demanded. Grid nonchalantly replied, "It's just the effect of an item." Rewinding to before these events, Grid, then a mere level 73 player, had spent months on this endeavor, enduring countless hardships. He recalled the absurd S-rank quest from Count Acre, which involved finding the legendary craftsman's rare book. Grid finally discovered the item but realized he needed the expensive Pan's Eye to analyze it. Frustrated, he lamented how much money he had already spent on potions and equipment for this game, questioning why he always ended up in these situations. Grid had taken out loans to fund his gameplay, convincing himself that debts could always be postponed. When he analyzed the item, it turned out to be the legendary Pagma's rare book. Using it would make him Pagma's descendant, a legendary class blacksmith. The item instantly increased his reputation by 500 across the continent. Grid was astonished by the discovery of a legendary class, recognizing its immense power and potential wealth. Yet, Grid hesitated. Completing the S-rank quest would be the smart choice, but selling the legendary item could earn him a fortune. He reflected on his struggles, working manual labor jobs to pay off university loans and gaming expenses. His gaming addiction had caused his friends to abandon him, and even his family saw him as a burden. But now, he could finally change his life. Thinking of his family, Grid celebrated his newfound fortune, declaring that he was no longer a failure. As he prepared to log out and sell the item, the game informed him that logging out was not allowed at that moment. The mission Catcher's secret request changed to Catcher's Fury SS. Confused, he wondered what was going on when the Count appeared with several subordinates, angrily accusing the boy of being consumed by greed. The boy realized the Count was there, and his new mission stated that Catcher had noticed his selfish and greedy intentions to steal the mission item, reinforcing himself and now aiming to kill him to retrieve it. Surprised, the boy heard Shu say that Catcher had decided to extract him, despite their contract. But Grid stood his ground, insisting he had done nothing wrong, or ordered his subordinates to capture him, bringing him back to the moment where his throat was nearly slit. Grid, reflecting on the months he had dedicated to this, refused to die like that. He managed to dodge the slash, declaring that he would clear this mission no matter what. Despite being only a level 73 player, he activated the Guardian Stone Shield skill. However, Catcher used magic to shatter the shield, leaving Grid shocked as he was thrown back, losing half his HP. Furious, he complained that even though he blocked the attack, he still lost half his health. Grid acknowledged that Catcher was a level 300 NPC but was caught off guard by the power of his subordinates. Realizing the mission wasn't designed for someone of his level, he cursed, admitting he should have seen this coming given his terrible luck. He paused to consider what would happen to the book if he died. Would it disappear? Concluding he couldn't win or complete the mission and wouldn't even earn gold for the item, Grid realized his only option. Asher screamed to his subordinates that the boy planned to open the book, urging them to stop him. But Grid declared it was too late and began to open the book, scolding Asher for his carelessness. The summoning and class change began. Grid vowed to surpass his limits, and the system reset all his skills and stats. Optimistic, he thought he might clear the mission with the legendary class he had just obtained, becoming Pagma's descendant. A flurry of stats appeared on his screen, but Grid noticed the class was labor-intensive, even in the game. Mocking himself for suffering so much, he thought the rewards must be valuable. Grid resolved to annihilate the idiots who stood in his way and finish the mission. His class change completed, granting him the title of one who became a legend, and he vowed that everyone would die. But then, he returned to level 1, wearing only underwear. Moments later, a single hit to his forehead killed him. In reality, someone noted that the class change had occurred 5 minutes earlier. A man, hearing this, said he was on his way, asking for a summary of the report. Thinking about the class change, he remarked how amusing it seemed. Meanwhile, Grid, now at level -1, had failed the mission and could no longer enter Patrium, where the soldiers would kill him on sight. Speaking to Asher, Grid asked if he'd really kill someone over using an item. Calling Asher a thief, Grid accused him of pursuing him all along to reclaim what rightfully belonged to him. Returning to reality, Grid exited the bizarre gaming capsule, exhausted but smiling. "That was fun," he muttered, his face shadowed by massive dark circles under his eyes. Thinking about the 100 million WS he could have earned, his mother appeared, scolding him for keeping the game on at such an hour, asking if he thought she owned the energy company. AT Satisfice Operational Office, part of the Sa Choi Na Group, a staff member welcomed her superior. He asked if she'd reported the class change from 5 minutes ago, admitting he never expected it to happen and requested the field report. Lin Churu, Satisfice lead developer, provided details. The player's ID was GD, previously a level 73 player, now at level -1. His real name was Xing Yonghua, and he had obtained Pagma's rare book during the mission, Asher's Secret Request. According to the information department, he was just another unemployed game addict, residing in one city for about a year and spending 3 months exploring areas with level 200+ monsters, dying multiple times. Despite orders to thoroughly investigate the legendary class, they believed the outcome was coincidental, attributing it to Grid's inefficiency. Yet, his obsession and determination seemed pivotal. The developer questioned whether such persistence could really be a coincidence, noting how Grid's actions defied expectations set by Morpheus, the supercomputer. The system predicted Pagma's descendant would be discovered 2 years later, Yet this player not only found the northern cave's depths but activated the associated mission, defying odds. Although the legendary class was inherently weak in combat compared to others, Grid had used the item out of desperation, triggering the penalty of instantly reverting to level 1. After failing 2 side missions, he dropped 2 more levels, ending up at -1. Hearing this, Lin Churu protested, saying the game seemed unbalanced. But the developer dismissed her concerns, arguing there was no need to adjust the system for an inefficient player like Grid. Amused, he commented on Grid's situation before leaving, asking to be updated on further developments. Meanwhile, at work, Grid was berated by his bosses for his poor performance, with remarks about his smell and incompetence. Dismissed as a loser, he returned home with his measly earnings, muttering it was enough for another round in the game. He wonders, who would have thought the first thing that comes to mind is a game? He starts thinking he should feel ashamed because that book alone could have been enough to change his life. Yet here he is, with hundreds of millions of won lost. He had spent so much time building his reputation in that city, only for all his work to leave him at level -1. As he sat there wallowing in self-pity, the president drove by, remarking that there was nothing particularly special about that user. Yet, he added, that might be his advantage. But of course, he'll have to figure that out for himself. In the meantime, Gray Super Honda should look for something else to do with his life. Surely, there must be something he's good at. Questioning whether there's anything he excels at, Grid stops himself and decides to give the game another chance. Meanwhile, the president reflects that the best thing about that brat is that he doesn't know when to quit. Back home, Grid contemplates logging back into the game, eager to see how the class works despite losing everything. As long as the capsule holds up, everything will be fine, he says. Relying on it once more, he vows to recover his money no matter what. He connects to Satisfy, appearing naked once again, and wonders where he is, as this place looks nothing like the cave he was in before. He thinks he's still in the Patran region, but hasn't fully explored the area. He grumbles that banning him for being distracted seems excessive and decides he needs to find a sign to orient himself. Looking ahead, he spots something that seems quite dangerous. Upon closer inspection, he sees something he definitely shouldn't. A sacrificial ritual with a woman lying at the center. What kind of place is this? He asks himself. The system informs him that he has entered the Yatan Temple, and he realizes temples are for players level 150 and above. This place is far too dangerous for him right now. Checking his stats, he sees the class and title listed but also notices he's carrying an absurd amount of weight, confirming that he's truly at level -1. Realizing it's not a system bug, he remarks that the options still look great since he can use his repair skills to earn money. Counting his items, he tries equipping one. To his surprise, he can equip a level 60 item, which would usually require at least 200 strength. However, he notices he'll have to deal with penalties. Even so, he says the longsword's attack power of 200 and the metal armor's defense of around 130 are far superior to level 1 items. Despite the penalties, they're still much better. Feeling optimistic, he marvels at how legendary classes are incredible, allowing him to equip items well above his level. He considers himself lucky but quickly remembers where he is, a level 150 danger zone. Observing the area, he wonders if the game is setting him up for disaster. Hearing the woman in the ritual cry out in pain, he concludes there must be Yatan followers performing some kind of spell. He worries that even a scratch from them would be enough to kill him. At that moment, one of the followers appears behind him. As long as I'm not caught, I should be fine, Grid reassures himself. But the follower places a hand on his shoulder, startling him into dropping his sword. The man, calm, tells him to relax and asks if Grid was trying to kill him. He introduces himself as Doran, a secret guard under Strin's command. Doran assumes that since Grid was hiding, he's not one of the Yatan followers. Leading him to a more secluded spot, Doran explains everything. Grid learns that Kelly is actually Irene, the daughter of Count Stein, who was kidnapped while on vacation. Despite the dire situation, Doran is glad to have someone on his side. Grid complains about what he's hearing but ends up receiving a mission to rescue the Count's beloved daughter within 1 hour. The reward is 3,000 gold, with the potential to become the Count's son-in-law. Failure, however, will cost him 2 levels. Realizing this is another S-rank mission, Grid curses, calling Doran a cursed NPC. Doran notes that most people would be terrified, but seeing how composed Grid is, he assumes he must be strong. Grid sarcastically replies, doubting his own ability to handle the situation. He wonders if it's due to some innate skill he possesses, concluding it must be his self-control ability, which drastically reduces the chance of falling into abnormal conditions while boosting recovery speed. Grid resolves to quickly learn the pros and cons of his class. Surprised by his composure, Doran expresses gratitude for his help during such a difficult time. But Grid coldly asks, "Who said this is my problem?" Doran urges him to act, but Grid continues to refuse. The auto-calibration completes, and Grid marvels at how he can suddenly understand all the information. It's his first time crafting something, and perhaps it's due to his class. It almost feels like he's become a real blacksmith. The sword turns out great, with 1090 durability, 1820 attack power, 800 defense, and an additional 50 agility. He notes that some of the exaggerated stats were slightly adjusted, but it still came with all those extra options. He's astonished, realizing that each of those effects is incredibly overpowered. He tells himself that all he needs now is blue orichalcum from the mission group Guardian of the Forest. However, he recalls that the group is looking for players at level 200 and above, deciding to leave the material for now while pondering the absurd conditions attached to the item. The user restriction is level 300 or higher, with strength over 5,000, advanced sword mastery level 8 or higher, and a weight of 550. Grid remarks that the number 1 ranked player in the unified rankings has only just reached level 250, and even if he allocated all his status points to strength, he wouldn't hit 5,000. The top blacksmith is barely at the intermediate level, but the sword requires advanced sword mastery level 8 or higher. "I've made a mess with an invaluable skill," he grumbles, calling it a colossal screw-up in the shape of a shark. Still, he reasons that it isn't entirely useless since he has no restrictions on equipping items. Although the penalty for equipping it is severe, the long sword remains overpowered. He just needs to find a way to create it, deciding to join the Guardian of the Forest group. Knowing he'll need to be carried since tackling this at level -3 is akin to digging his own grave, he approaches the group. The recruiter is surprised he wants to join and tells him to get lost. Grid asks why, and the recruiter explains that the group is for players level 190 and above. Judging by his equipment, he seems to be around level 60. Grid claims he's level 100, though his gear is more modest. He argues that skill matters more than equipment. The recruiter retorts, asking if Grid is implying that his group relies solely on gear, questioning how an unknown player dares to belittle them. He points out Grid lacks accessories and, from appearances, is likely lying about being level 100. "Aren't you ashamed to be so shameless?" he asks. At that moment, Regis intervenes, telling everyone to calm down. He mentions that his guild will handle the boss fight and suggests letting Grid help with something else. The group realizes it's Regis from the Sadaka Guild, the number 1 ranked martial artist known as Sacred Fist. Despite the high-class requirements making it difficult to level up, Regis has already surpassed level 180. Grid, envious, mutters about how unfair the world is. The recruiter grumbles that Regis is too lenient, saying they shouldn't accept suspicious players. Regis counters, asking if having more people to loot isn't better. Grid chimes in, agreeing, and assures them he'll handle it. While he doesn't like Regis's handsome face, he admits he's a good guy. The recruiter reluctantly agrees, but doubts the other members will be convinced. Grid silently hopes Regis will push the decision in his favor. Regis suggests a one-on-one skill test to prove Grid's worth. Grid realizes he's in trouble. Regis asks if he's ready, and the recruiter announces the test will begin. Panicking, Grid bolts, shouting that they're too annoying and claiming he needs to train his legs today. Regis watches him run off, lamenting that it would have been great if he had joined. Grid mutters that he knew it wouldn't work out and decides to focus on earning money for a carriage ride. The system prompts him to name his item, and though frustrated by his creation, Grid acknowledges that he's learned how crafting works. Since the crafting skill has limited uses, he plans to make customized items when needed. Naming the sword Failure, he resolves to keep going, declaring this is just the beginning. He heads to a forge, but the blacksmith immediately tells him to leave.